Hello. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Emerald Coast. My name is Amanda Pyburn. I'm a member of this fellowship and will be your service leader this morning. The Unitarians come from a liberal theological background, stressing not creed, but religious integrity, freedom to be true to our own search for meaning. Universalists stress expansive love that excludes no one. Together, we find value in all sacred texts and all of humankind's religious aspirations. We've had many online services in recent months with a variety of speakers, but today's speaker is one of my favorites. Reverend York from the UU Fellowship of Vero Beach, Florida, will be speaking to us on the intimacy of strangers. Whatever your religious or political leanings, her words are likely to strike home with you as they did with me. But first, our chalice lighting. We gather in this time of uncertainty, full of unknowns as angst closes in upon us. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the darkness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our interconnection. For this moment, this radical moment, we find a certainty within the knowable bonds of love and community.
I wrote this song 30 years ago so my friend Pat Lamana could give it this contemporary message. Gather in spirit, not face to face. Let's do what we can to flatten the curve. Wash your hands often and don't touch your face. This virus is something no one deserves. Gather on Skype, gather on Zoom, gather by phone with family and friends. Gather online, but don't leave your room. Let's all stay safe until this crisis ends. Gather on Facebook, but not for too long. There's so many ways to sweeten the time. Take up crochet, write a new song, read a good book, bake brownies sublime. Gather on Skype, gather on Zoom, gather
Our story for all ages was written by Jen Blosser, Director of Religious Education at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fort Myers. It's not a picture book. There are no illustrations, but this is something that's been going on all around us, and I bet you've already got the pictures in your head that you need. Somewhere in the world, there was a child and a grandparent sheltering in place, just like you are now. And they were really fed up, perhaps a bit like you are sometimes. The novelty of being at home, no school, no alarms, no homework, oh, it had gotten old. And doing whatever you want all the time, it was just getting boring. For the grandparent, it was less a feeling of boredom than just hopelessness weighing them down. They had watched TV for hours. I have, haven't you? Although how many hours remained a mystery. They had stopped keeping track a long time ago. The days all blurred together. What day is it anyway? And they felt they had been doing this for so long. And then one day, the child accidentally sat on the remote after getting up for some more snacks, and the TV accidentally turned off. Well, now there was something new reflected in that blank screen of the TV. Where was that coming from? They looked around. Looking out the window, they saw in the house across the street a piece of paper taped to the window, and on that paper was a colorfully drawn rainbow. Well, this was something new, something unexpected and bright and cheery. The child and grandparent turned to one another. Oh, same idea at the same time. One ran for paper and crayons, the other ran for tape. And before you knew it, they had drawn their own beautifully colored rainbow and taped it into their own window, mirroring the one across the street. Well, what happened next was like magic. Every day, more cheerful rainbows appeared in more windows, up and down the street. The child and grandparent gleefully drew rainbows for every window in their house, watching their neighbors all do the same. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple, all manner of colors burst forth, seeming to shine through the windows, a cacophony of color. But the people didn't stop there. They continued to draw. Rainbows were taped to neighbors' doors and slipped into mailboxes. They were sent to nursing homes to cheer up beloved elders who couldn't have visitors right now. Rainbows were left under the windshield wipers of strangers' cars, and even tucked between the beans and the corn and boxes of cereal at the grocery store, or left waiting on those empty shelves where the toilet paper was sold out. Now, when families went on walks around the city, they could go rainbow hunting. The child and grandfather liked to do this, and they took paper with them to record where they found every rainbow. The empty school, the closed down store, the dance studio that couldn't have lessons right now. They made a list of all the rainbows emerging, logging each place where colors shone upon the empty streets. Well, by now you've probably figured out that this story really is happening all over the world right now. Folks are coming together in spirit while physically distanced to lovingly reassure one another with brilliant colors. The rainbows are beautiful, and just seeing them alone is a joy, but they also carry with them a promise. The rainbows shine as a reminder of hope. We are in this together. The storm will end, and we will all come out on the other side. Well, as you think about this story, you might be thinking of things that you could do that are different, something cheerful to relieve your boredom, something to cheer up your neighbors, or even those strangers that you may never even talk to, but that would see if you did some beautiful art, maybe chalk on the sidewalk, maybe colors on your glass window, maybe a phone call or something delivered to people who can't get out. It not only cheers up them, it gives us a sense of purpose and makes us feel better in these weird times too. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. I have some things I want to say today about what is happening in our nation this week. But I want to start here in my own neighborhood here in Vero Beach, in a pandemic which is the backdrop for it all. Smallish houses are crammed in close together and all have the same look. But the people are not homogenized. I walk my dogs daily, and I am greeted by neighbors in various shades of humanity, speaking in several languages, from Russian to Asian to South American. I love the diversity, not just old folks like me, but lots of families with children, young people who share the rent with friends, and snowbirds who can afford a second home. There's one young guy who walks along the sidewalk with earphones, holding his phone in both hands, looking down, and there is no way to catch his eye and get so much as a nod of acknowledgement. But he is the exception. Most people are very friendly, and it's amazing how much we can say in just those few seconds that it takes to pass one another. So I know that the gay couple with the little yippy dogs have a business that recently reopened, and the kid next door graduated from the 8th grade, and the nurse across the street is coping very well. Well, I don't really know, do I? I make assumptions based on observations. The gay guys may not be gay. They could be brothers or friends. The black couple that walks around the square with their young children, always dressed like they are on their way to church, look like they might be from Africa. And the two women in long skirts and head wraps look Caribbean. But what do I know, really? Not much. Then there is the friendly guy who sits in his garage and he smokes cigars early in the morning. He has a couple of signs to help neighbors get him sized up. One says, "Veteran and proud." The other sign hangs just inside his garage. It says, "Asshole's Garage." His next-door neighbor has a similar sign in his garage, hanging in the same sort of place. And it says, "Asshole's Neighbor." Now, I might assume that the signs refer to the guy who is there enjoying his cigar. But for all I know, they might refer to someone else who lives in the same house, maybe even someone female. And how might all these neighbors of mine be sizing up this woman who walks every day with her two black and white spotted dogs? Well, she is the old lady with the Dalmatians, of course. Now, they got the old part right, but the dogs are actually English pointers. Living in the time of a pandemic hasn't changed our neighborly exchanges much. Sometimes there's a little contest to see who will leave the sidewalk and take to the street first. Some people wear masks, some don't. But there is a change. Not in the daily greetings, nor in our outward exchange, but here in our own heads. I suspect I am not the only one trying not to walk too closely behind someone or staying clear of that family that just moved in from New York. The pandemic has taken fear of the stranger to new levels. Our fear dictates how much risk we can tolerate, doesn't it? And as we know, a lot of factors are involved. Our age, our health, those are the obvious ones. There's a deadly virus out there, and it is killing people. And we are all vulnerable, some more vulnerable than others. I remember back in the 70s, some of you may remember too, there was a boy named David who was born with a rare disease that rendered him incapable of warding off the slightest infection. They called him the Bubble Boy because he lived his entire life in a sterile plastic bubble. It was that or death. At 12, he and his family decided to risk a bone marrow transplant from his sister. It must have been a difficult decision to abandon the bubble and risk death in order to have a more normal life. He died 15 days after he slipped the seals of his sterile plastic world and crawled out to be kissed by his mother for the first time in his life and to feel the touch of a hand that was not protected with a glove. David opted to take the risk. Well, we are all in our own bubbles, and each of us decides what is worth taking a risk for. Now, I suppose I take a risk when I walk my dogs, although I think it's a low risk. But it means the difference for me between living and thriving. I do not need to eat out to thrive. I do not need to travel to thrive. But that's just me. Maybe you do. Maybe you have Zoom or Skype fatigue and you need to see your grandchild in person. Maybe you hate your own cooking, and so it's worth the risk to eat out. Maybe your tolerance for poverty is really low, and so you need to go to work. And every time you step out the door, you know there is some level of fear and risk. So, I am back in my neighborhood, in my own bubble, and my neighbors are in theirs. I pass a house where a single mother lives with her 3 children. We have chatted a time or two, and I really like her. Also, her teenagers don't think that I am invisible, which is nice. But one day, as I walk by her house, there is this flag out front. Just one word: Trump. And now my bubble is fogging up with the steam that's coming out of my ears. I can barely see past the bubble. Something has changed. In me, I mean. Single mom goes in the same category with neighbors with their Trump bumper stickers and their MAGA hats. And this brings me to another level of fear, particularly in our encounters with strangers. It's a jungle out there where the masked and the unmasked duke it out in a little civil war that is a microcosm of the huge political divide. This pandemic has accentuated polarities that seem irreconcilable. As my friend Joanna Bliss puts it, we flounder in a sea of finger pointing. And now, this political chasm has cracked wider and deeper with sanctioned violence against Black people. A lynching in Georgia. A lynching. Let me say that again. A real, honest-to-goodness lynching. The cold-blooded murder of Ahmaud Arbery for no other reason than that he is Black. A 9/11 call threatened the life of Christian Cooper, a Black man birding in Central Park. Breonna Taylor shot without cause by police with a no-knock warrant in the middle of the night. These are only recently publicized incidents, you know that. And then, of course, there's the one that has set off outbursts of rage all over the country and beyond. The murder of George Floyd out in the open, another lynching virtually sanctioned by the President of the United States, whose flip response was just to tweet, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." And that just makes me cry. Never mind that the shooting has been going on for some time. And I don't just mean white vigilantes or white police officers killing Black men. I mean Black people shooting Black people too, because drugs have been pumped into urban ghettos for decades, like a plague that targets people who are poor and Black. And COVID-19 is just one more pestilence that seeks out the vulnerable and has ravaged the African American community. I can't breathe is what people say before COVID-19 smothers them to death. And I can't breathe is now the metaphor for the moral pandemic in our nation. I go back now to my neighbors with the flags and the bumper stickers and the MAGA hats. They are my neighbors. They are not white extremists protesting in Michigan with AR-15 weapons or agent provocateurs instigating riots. But they vote, and that scares me. That really scares me. I'm not afraid of them as individuals. I am afraid of whatever it is that prompts them to support a president who is openly racist, incites violence, and then uses tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse a crowd of peaceful protesters. Here in a pandemic, with a major election only months away, I am afraid that their votes will be counted, while Black votes in the rural South and beyond will be Black voters will be standing in line for hours because their voting opportunities have been suppressed. If they're lucky enough to get in line, that is. And I'm afraid that too many of us, white folks, will be like the good Germans. The good Germans who just did their best to live their lives in their own bubbles and ignored the Holocaust that was decimating their Jewish neighbors. And this brings me to a third level of fear. Gosh, I really don't like what's going on in my head when I encounter those neighbors with the Trump flags and the MAGA hats, or when I witness the stubborn refusal of the president and his followers to wear masks for the protection of others. I'm not alone in this. It's a spiritual issue. This matter of what goes on in our minds when we encounter a stranger who triggers fear in us. My dear friend, Jerry Goddard, named it well. Oh, so many years ago, a note that he sent me. He was writing about an experience that he had late the night before. On my way home about 11 last night, he wrote, I came upon a car showing front-end smoke and some flames, with a black teenage girl waving for help. It being a deserted, semi-country road, I followed my recent declaration and admonition to others not to stop alone at night for seeming emergencies, but drive on to make a phone call for assistance. A recent string of muggings, including a murder in such settings, was my motive. After 10 seconds of anguish that seemed more like an hour, I braked and backed up with an expletive or three. She was black and young, in trouble, and in greater danger than I. It wasn't a setup. A wiring fire had ignited insulation, and the hood latch was so hot it wouldn't open at first. Except for a second-degree burn the size of a silver dollar on the inside of my arm and a lost hour and a half, I came out okay. And then Jerry added this sentence with its disarming sting of moral clarity. Oh, Sarah, he wrote, I don't want to live in a world where I leave someone I believe to be in danger because it might be a danger to me. A decade later, Jerry reflected further on what was really, truly at stake for him that night. Years later, he wrote, the white scar on my arm remains a marker. My fear of strangers, a potent, inborn human characteristic, was overwhelmed that night in a flash of tacit recognition that the otherness of the stranger is always already in me and those I love. That young woman was inseparable from my daughter or from you, standing alone, frightened, and in trouble on the side of the road at night. In that uncanny moment, I knew her terror and her longing as if they were my own. To drive by without stopping would be to leave a piece of myself to die. To drive by without stopping would be to leave a piece of myself to die. For Jerry, the real danger to him was not his physical life, but rather a quashing of the core of compassion in his spirit. Jerry was conscious that he was white and she was black. Here was a man who had marched in Selma, Alabama in the 1960s, feeling something non-rational at play. Perhaps it was because of his commitment to anti-racism and his loathing for the prejudice in his own heart that he was so sensitive to that moment of hesitation when he wondered if this was a setup. Jerry is an inspiration to me, not only in his courage to get beyond fear, but in his recognition of the spiritual costs when we retreat into our own bubbles. Jerry's story illustrates what I call the holy intimacy of strangers. It is the place where we are vulnerable and human. It's a place where we recognize ourselves in another human being. And it's the place where we meet the stranger in ourselves. In the words of Maya Angelou, I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. I started this sermon talking about how we all size each other up. There are always subtle, non-rational ways our minds work when we encounter strangers. But I tell you this, I don't want to lump people into a category of aliens and dismiss them, even though I may detest what they stand for, because I do damage to my own spirit when I label them. It is dehumanizing to them, and it is dehumanizing to me. And I don't want to be like the good Germans either, passively looking the other way while evil masquerades as freedom. Fear, anger, rage, even despair. Yes, we feel it. And yes, we must address evil. But we do not want our fear and our anger to harden our hearts or diminish our souls. And we, especially we white folks who want to hope for change, we do not want our hope to be a passive wish for change, but rather inspiration for action. As Scott told us, we will hear about some opportunities for empowerment in next week's service. The holy intimacy of strangers is the bond of fear. It is the bond of rage. And it is also the bond of compassion and the bond we feel when we are empowered to act. In these times when we long for inspiration and leadership, I'm recalling the words of Martin Luther King, Jr., and these are words that I think of often. He said, "We should never let anyone bring us so low as to hate them." Amen to that. It's hard. It's hard. He knew it was hard. But he knew that hate is the enemy of the spirit. Do not return hate with hate. Love your neighbor. Period. Amen. Please join me now in singing our final hymn, Wake Now My Senses, or if you don't have the words, just hum along with us.
Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us, in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space one to another, connecting us invisibly, but palpably. We are one, and from every window our light shines.